Oh, and,
does not have a direct relationship with both, but it has.
zitta, cavolo.
Il tempo è stato massimo 2. No, vedi, sta funzionando, sta girando, non lo ricordo.
Good afternoon to everybody. Can you hear me? Please. Wow. You know, we are a great number. We are over 50. Afterwards, I'll just see who 54. I'll just check who's here and who isn't here, just to know if we have some students that have a problem, so I can write to them. Well, it's good you've sent me all these messages, so I know afterwards I'll do a check and see what how to communicate with students who are not here present in the lesson. Second aspect, I do apologize, obviously, for the inconvenience. It doesn't depend on me. The instructions are very strict, and I think this is also, I mean, it's a elementary safety measure. So I think it's in our interest not to be in class. And the instructions are very, very clear by the Minister of University, Minister of Health, and by the whole government has suspended all lessons. Now, what I will, there are various things I want to tell you. The first thing I do need your comments at the end. All right. During the lesson, if there are problems during the lesson, please send me with please, I don't know who is who still has the his or her microphone on. Please put it on mute. You find the mute icon or at the bottom of your screen on the left hand, or just next to your image. You have a small snapshot of you and you find an indication mute and you press on that, because otherwise whatever noise is in your room or the traffic or wherever you are, it disturbs the audio of the lesson. So please, all of you, I see most of you, I think all of you, just let me see. Yes, you all have you're all muted. Yes, I will ask, sorry, some of you have put a nickname as your name. For example, Galaxy A40. Can you please tell me then, say Galaxy A40 is Rossi Bianchi Verdi or whatever it is, because it makes it difficult for me. And then I think there's also an Arianna, as there at least two Arianne. Obviously, I don't know which of the two Arianne is taking part in the conference. Let me see if anybody else has a nickname. No, I think it's more or less like that. Because there, okay, that's fine. So I think it's only Galaxy A40 can just disambiguate the nickname. Then I will ask you at the end, Galaxy, it's Valerio Mellucci, thank you. Arianna Serafini, yes, because there's another Arianna somewhere else, and it's Arianna Bove, but I think she's already connected. I will be asking your assistants to give me indications on the quality of the image, of the quality also of the lesson, if the lesson makes sense, because I have a certain experience in doing lessons for on-distance universities with recorded lessons, but that all is in a studio. It's done in a studio, and it's much more professional than what I have managed to organize in these few days. So please don't worry. I mean, all your comments are very precious, and if they're and what is precious are your critical comments. Say, listen, this doesn't work, because I have to learn obviously from you. I don't know how my lesson is. You must tell me if the lesson works or not. Now let's go back to the main the problem that we were analyzing last week. We stopped the lesson talking about electoral systems. Now, I just want to tell you that I have a series of slides, so I will interval my lesson with a series of slides, which I hope can help you understand better what we are talking about. It's just as if we have a blackboard in the class, and I will be using that. Now, why are electoral systems so important to understand the when we are looking at comparing democratic systems? We try to look at elections. Elections obviously are very important because the issue is who votes, and we have already seen that in certain countries voting is not only a right but a duty. In other countries it's an option. If you want to vote in the US and the UK, if you want to vote, you have to register. Otherwise, if you're not interested in voting, you don't register and you don't vote. And as a matter of fact, in the US, there's one of the main concerns is that there are millions and millions of US citizens who are eligible to vote but do not register, and do not vote and do not give their vote for whatever elections is there, a presidential, Congress, or local elections. So having said this, we're also interested in the technicalities. Now, electoral systems are more like a game of chess. If you like chess, you like electoral systems. If you don't like chess, you don't like electoral systems. The problem is that while in chess it's a one-to-one, it's me black against someone else who's white, and that's it. In the electoral systems, it's the whole how the democratic system works. Just please remember we are talking about democratic systems. We're not interested in countries where people do not vote, or if they go to vote, the vote is already, they have a marked ballot and then it comes out that 98% of voters have voted in a certain direction. We're talking of democracies. Therefore, voting systems are very, very important to they give the shape, they give it the taste, the flavor of the democracy. In one way or another, it's not one system is better than another. It's just that we should know how these systems work, and in particular, as Italians, and I'm addressing myself to our Italian students, as we regularly start discussing about changing electoral systems, well, it's also interesting to see how electoral systems work in other jurisdictions. Now, having said this, let's see if I can manage to give you this. Sorry, I'm trying to see if I can. Now, let me see. I should have files. Oh, yes, I should have a file here. No, advanced. Sorry, because I put it on the trying to share a file of which is, I do not find it here. Why don't I find it here? Sorry. Sorry, I'm going just because I thought it was sufficient to put these slides on the screen on the desktop, while instead, obviously, it is not sufficient. Select the window you want to share. Now, what do I want to share? Let me see. Can I see? No, can't minimize this. Sorry, I'm fidgeting around this. Please just give me. Yes, here we are. Can you see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, that's great. Okay, one for everybody. Now, what is the? I have a few slides here on voting. Now, so the issue is obviously democracy starts with, and it starts in Athens. That you've all studied, or most of you have studied, how democracy started in Athens, and they cast ballots. They were on pieces of stone, white stones, and they voted. And so that's why we call it democracy. And I put, for those of you who studied Greek at high school, demos, obviously this is the root of the notion of democracy. So how do they express their will? They express their will sometimes direct democracy. Now, this is something which is common in many countries at a local level, and also in certain countries, such as Switzerland, at a much higher federal level. And therefore, you have referenda, and in which citizens vote in favor or against a certain proposal. In Italy, we had this referendum, which was called for the 29th of March. Now it's been postponed, on the constitutional change, whether we want or do not want to reduce the numbers of members of parliament, both Senate and House of Representatives. So that's direct democracy, and so the decision of the people is direct. It's not, there's no why direct, because there's no intermediation through representatives. And here we have quoted the case of Switzerland, in which any change of the constitution must be voted by citizens. Now, this happens also in other countries, such as Italy, but there it is something very, very common. If someone of you is interested in seeing what the Swiss constitution, how it works, because we think Switzerland is a nice country, a country that works and citizens are satisfied with their system, well, just look at this constitution, and you will see that this constitution has dozens and dozens of changes in it, because they have been voted by citizens and they are regularly voted. They go once or twice per year, they go to vote to decide whether to change this or that article, provision of the Constitution. Then a further element that I would like to point out is the notion of digital democracy. Now, this is, it's unfortunate we have fallen in this moment, this dramatic moment for Italy, and hopefully not for other countries, in which everything we have to do, most of the things we have to do them by through digital networks. But this is an issue that is coming up regularly, the fact that voters can use online technologies to express their will. Now, the problem is obviously, first of all, security of the network, to avoid that someone enters and hacks the system and puts in false ballots. And then the fact of authenticity. Who is voting? Is when I vote on the online, is it exactly me? How do I identify myself? Should I use, what procedures should be used to ensure that that person, only that person is voting, or that vote, that there isn't someone who's voting for someone else, if that voting for someone else is not allowed. So just to point out that these are aspects that surely will be very important for your future, in your future experience as citizens. Just keep in mind that this has to do also with the kind of democracy we want, or we have, or we would like, or we do not like. The use of technologies in order to favor participation of citizens in the public decisions, in the decision-making process. So, having said this, and these are the general principles in the field of, general notions in the field of vote, let's try and look at the two electoral systems. So the idea that people go to vote and elect representatives. So we're not talking of direct democracy, where through a referendum citizens express their will and that's it. Take, for example, Brexit, although Brexit was somehow a referendum which was a standalone referendum. There was a law behind it, but anyhow, citizens, the majority, although small, not big majority, but the majority of UK citizens decided that the UK should leave the European Union. And so that is, they expressed their will, and then this has actually happened on the 31st of January 2020, so 4 years later. Now, let's look at these electoral systems where we vote for representatives. I will focus mostly on elections for parliament, for the legislative power, but the same principles can work when we're looking at presidential systems, such as the US president, or semi-presidential systems, such as the French president. Now we have these two great models. Keep in mind that these models can somehow combine, and so they're not sort of, they're not given once for all, but they're two main models, and we must try to understand what are the features of these two models. The first model is the majoritarian model, and the other models are so-called proportional models. Now, majoritarian voting systems, we find them mostly, not exclusively, but mostly in the US, in the UK, and anyhow Anglo-Saxon countries, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. We find it also in other countries. But what is how does the system work? The country, the nation, is divided in voting districts. That is a regional distribution, division of the country. So there is a district where, and voters belong to that district. And generally, not always, but generally for each of these voting districts, there is one and only one representative. So when people go to vote, they go to vote to choose the representative of that district, not a number of representatives, not 2, 3, 5, 20, 30, 50, 80 representatives for that district. But each district sends to the parliament, if we are talking of general elections, sends to parliament one representative for each district. Now, who wins that district? The candidate which receives more votes than anybody else. So even if there are candidates, let's imagine there are 3, 4 candidates, if they one has 100 votes, another one has 99, 98, and 97, even though the other three have altogether are more or less 300 votes, nearly 300 votes, the one who has received most votes, the one who has received 100 votes, gets elected. So it's, as I mentioned in class last week, it's as the British like very much horse racing, who wins the race first past the post. So when there's a horse race, obviously the winner of the horse race is the first past the post. All the others haven't won anything. So there's one winner and all the others are losers. So in this majoritarian system, what does, yes? Any problem? Listen, as I can't see, because with this screen, looking at the slides, I cannot see your messages. If there's any problem, please unmute your microphone and give me a call and say, listen, we have a problem. Houston, we have a problem. So just to point out that, just to tell you that I can't see it. I'm not yet familiar enough with the Zoom system to see what your message is. So if there's a problem, just unmute your microphone and just get on and express your and speak out loud. Now, this is the majoritarian system. It has advantages, and surely it has advantages. It's been used for well, centuries in the US and the UK, which are two democratic countries which have had a very big development, and therefore, I mean, it can't be wrong. I mean, if it's been experimented, these countries have been able to change these systems. They have not changed these systems, so obviously citizens are sufficiently satisfied with this majoritarian system. Advantages. First point, it gives very much importance to individual votes. The fact that in the example I made to you, one candidate receives 100 votes, another receives 99, another 98, another 97, that one vote that candidate A has received makes him the winner. So it means that every vote counts. Now, this is not theoretical. We have the typical case is the elections of the US elections of to the year 2000, in which George W. Bush Jr. won the elections because he won a key state which gave him lots of representatives. I won't enter the intricacies of the American presidential electoral system. You will learn everything this fall, but anyhow, it's somehow divided by according to the number of representatives you can capture, become your representatives in a state, and the key state was Florida, and after 1, 2, 3 recounts, because they had to count them many times, they even went to the US Supreme Court to try to solve the problem. It came out that President Bush had won, had become president because he had won Florida, with having obtained not more than 500 votes more than his opponent, the Democrat candidate Al Gore. So this tells you you become president of the US because in one state you have had 500 votes more. So just to show you that this means empowerment of citizens. It's something to be considered. If we think that democracy is important, well then vote should be important. So surely this system empowers citizens and makes their vote, and therefore you're very much compelled to say, go and vote. If you think this is something that happened quite recently in the regional elections for the governor of the president of the region, Emilia-Romagna, where apparently it was a neck-to-neck race, but it was not a neck-to-neck race, but anyhow, it made a significant difference who got most votes. So just to point out that this is law, these are rules, but obviously have much to do with how we feel democracy. And obviously we think voting is not so important. Well, we don't give much importance to vote. In countries where we feel that voting is important, well, this shows the majoritarian system is effective. Now, second element, as there's only one representative for each district, this means that that representative must represent not only those who have voted for him, but the interest of that district. He can't somehow be disinterested for everything that happens in his district if he or she wants to be re-elected. This creates a very strong line between the person who's been elected and his district, his constituency. Very good example. The presidential, US Democratic primaries. Here we have a candidate, Senator Bernie Sanders, who's been senator for one of the two senators. Remember, in the US, the senators are only 2 for every state. He's been senator for Vermont, a small state on the northeastern Atlantic coast. He's been there for 20, 25 years. Obviously, he has been able to represent appropriately his constituency and to keep very strong bounds and lines with his constituency. So just to point out that this is important. It gives responsibility to and accountability on representatives. This is also important from a democratic point of view. It's not that you're voting once you've been elected, then you can forget about who's voted for you. No, you must continuously go there and tell them what you've been doing, what are your needs, and keep in touch with them and follow their interest. Third element, which also is very important from a democratic point of view, is that a majoritarian voting system favors a two-party system. As you have to, I mean, just think of the case example I made to you. The fact that you have now, sorry, I just want to see, I want to try and use this whiteboard, because, sorry, just tell me if it works. And so let's see. So we have candidate A. Let's see, equal 100. Can you see what I'm writing? Can someone?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see. Okay. Now, as you can see from this hypothetical case, we have an election in which we have, let's say we have 4 candidates. Now, these candidates come up with a very near, it's a neck-to-neck vote. One has 100, not 99, 98, 97 votes. Now, from a rational point of view, if this is the result of the constituency, voters are divided like that, candidates and their groups, their political groups, will tend to put together. So candidate A will say, hey, listen, candidate D, will you please join with me, we'll get together and we'll have 197 votes. And then candidate B will go to candidate C and say, listen, let's join forces, and there also comes out 197. So, so just to point out that the tendency, the result of majoritarian system is that, and we see this clearly in the US and in also partially in the UK. Sorry, just let me go back to the and to the UK, it brings to the polarization of political parties. Generally, two-party system. We have in the US Democrats versus Republicans. In the UK, we have mostly Conservative versus Labour, although we have also other parties, Liberal Democrats, Scottish National Party. But this is the generally speaking, the majoritarian. If we look at England and not so much, and we set aside Scotland, we see that generally it's nearly always a two-party race. There are the Lib Dems who manage to obtain a seat, find a seat in Parliament in very few constituencies. So it brings to polarization only two parties, and this means that it brings to stability of majorities and therefore of governments. This is something also to be considered, because a stable majority and a stable government enable that government to bring ahead its policies and to eliminate uncertainties in the future. A government that does not have a majority is very uncertain on what to do. So these are some of the advantages which are recognized with majoritarian systems. However, it's not as usual. There's no perfect system. Only heaven apparently is perfect, but we'll be dead when we go, if ever we go to heaven. So we're not so much interested in having a perfect system in the future. We're looking at what we have today and around in democratic countries and try to understand what are the best systems. So let's look at the advantages, but also disadvantages. Now, first disadvantage, and this is something important. I mean, just as the advantages are important, also disadvantages are important. In this majoritarian system, minorities, whether political minorities, linguistical minorities, religious minorities, are not represented. Why? Because they do not find, obviously, if you are a minority, you have no place in a majoritarian system. If you are, it goes per se. Majoritarian means the majority. If you're a minority, sorry very much, there's no room for you. You are an environmentalist, maybe you follow Greta Thunberg, but you are a minority in your community and you have no chance of going to power. So just think of situations where you have political fragmentation is very relevant. We have differences between voters think in a different way and want to be represented in their different way. And obviously then you have countries where you have linguistical differences. Just think for Italy, where you have South Tyrol, Alto Adige, where citizens are mostly German speaking, in a system, well, they might be represented there, but they would have little chance elsewhere in Italy. And other kinds of minorities which would not be represented. Then, second element, and it is not it's not only theoretical, but it is practical. In a district, only the candidate which has received the most votes gets elected. All the other votes, let's imagine in our fictional case of 4 candidates in which one receives 100 and gets elected, and all the others who have received 99, 98, 97 votes are not elected, all those votes are lost, in the sense they will find no representation. Although they're free, that means it's substantially, if there are 400 voters, it means that 3/4 of the voters are not represented in parliament. Only 1/4 is represented. So what happens, and this has happened, and given the examples, it has happened, not so frequently, but in certain cases, that a party or a president may govern, may be elected, having received less votes, but having gained more representatives. The typical English case is Churchill, who did bounce back after the Second World War, and he became elected as a conservative leader in 1951, although he had 250,000 votes less than his opponent, his Labour opponent, Clement Attlee. So that is one case, and then we have 2 reasonably recent cases in the US. Both George W. Bush and Donald Trump were elected as presidents of the US, although they had received less popular votes than their opponents. George W. Bush received less popular votes than Al Gore. Donald Trump received less votes, a couple of million less votes than Hillary Clinton. So just to point out that you start asking, but this is a typical case, saying, oh, but Donald Trump does not represent the majority of the US people. So you start discussing his legitimacy. You start saying, oh, but Donald Trump does not represent the majority of voters voted for Hillary Clinton. So there's recrimination. It means it makes democracy less credible, less stable. Further element, and we find this typical in, it's a problem that we find mostly in the US and partially in the UK, what is called gerrymandering. It is the system by which you try to build voting districts in order to favor a certain majority that otherwise would be a minority. Let's take a typical example of gerrymandering. Let's think of a big urban town in the US. Let's say Detroit. Now, it happens, and this is not uncommon, that the majority of population are in Detroit is colored. We could choose a place in somewhere else in southwestern US where they would be Latinos. But let's take Detroit, which is a good example. So the majority of the population is colored, and which, let's imagine that they have Democrat preferences. And they would have Democrat preferences, obviously, for a colored candidate, which seems quite reasonable. I mean, the representative must represent his voters, his or her voters. So there's nothing strange in that. So you choose someone who you feel belongs to you. You don't find someone who is distant, you feel is distant from you. So how do you somehow ensure that, let's imagine, white, more affluent voters get represented in Congress? What you do is you design you draw the electoral, the voting district in such a way that those parts of Detroit which are mostly inhabited by white population are one district, while the other part, which is mostly inhabited by colored citizens, vote in a different district. So whites, let's say, some kind of voting segregation. So the whites have their own district, and obviously they can quarrel between themselves if there's going to be a Democrat or a Republican congressman, while in that big district where the majority of the population is colored, they will choose, and they probably will choose, for a Democrat candidate. Just to point out, this is what we call gerrymandering. That is to maneuver drawing the size and the boundaries of the district according to demography. So if demography changes, obviously you will try to change voting districts. Just to point out that these are some of the disadvantages of the majoritarian system. There are some important, some are less important, but just to show you that no voting system is perfect. Now, let's move instead to the other system, the proportional system. Now, I've said majoritarian systems, US, UK, Anglo-Saxon countries. The rest of the world, not all, but quite often, when it comes to parliament, we have proportional voting systems. Although we may find some combination of the two. For example, in certain countries, the president is elected on a certain basis, while parliament is voted on a majoritarian basis. So the candidate gets more votes, gets elected, while in the parliament is elected on a proportional voting system. So you can combine these two. You can combine these two systems, and you find, but mostly, let's look at Europe. We see that mostly we use proportional voting systems. So what does proportional mean? What the term says by itself: each party which presents itself to the elections obtains a number of representatives in proportion with the votes which it receives. So there's a proportion between voters and representation in parliament. Hopefully, so there is this relationship, which is a proportional relation. Obviously, let's imagine there are 50 million voters, and there's an assembly of 500. So we have the scale, you scale from 50 million to 500, and you expect that those 500 should somehow represent the whole country, the whole voters. So what you do, you divide again in voting districts, but while in the US and the UK, voting districts are generally small because they have only one representative. Here, generally voting districts are much bigger, and there are more representatives for each voting district according to the size of the voting district. And then there's also a second system by which you do not count only the votes that are given in the voting district, but also on a national basis, which somehow ensures proportionality. So even if you are a minority and you have received votes in the whole of the territory, but you have not managed to get one representative in each voting district, on a national basis, maybe the amount of votes you have received make up for whatever you need to get at least one representative. So this is how the proportional voting system works, and what are its main differences in respect of the majoritarian. So proportional does not the winner, but obviously there are many winners, and all those who receive votes, a sufficient amount of votes, will get elected. So you see the idea behind it are the ideas behind it. The two systems are quite different. Now, again, let's look at the advantages. First of all, ensures political pluralism. Now, this is very important. The fact that, I mean, if you feel that politics are the two-party system does not represent you because you are a minority, well, you're not interested in politics. You feel that if you have more opportunities and your movement, your ideas are represented, you will participate in the electoral system. So you're not saying, oh, but it's the usual quarrel between Democrats and Republicans, between conservatives and Labour, and so I'm not interested because anyhow my views will never be represented. So political pluralism is something that we favor in a democratic system because we want all citizens to feel included in our system. So we have more political opinions which are represented, and we have representation of minorities. So also minorities are represented. In a majoritarian system, minorities have no chance of being represented. Someone has his or her microphone on. Now, disadvantages. Again, let's look at this. Fragmentation. So it's nice that everybody's represented, but obviously this brings fragmentation. If it's only me and another person, we have to discuss and find a solution. Let's imagine this coronavirus crisis, and there are only two parties who have to decide. Well, it's easier for them to find some kind of solution. If there are 7, 8, 9, 10 who have to decide on the epidemics, on taxation, on whatever decision they must take, well, it's difficult to put together 7, 8 parties rather than putting together 2 parties. So this makes it, this is the first element, is fragmentation. So for some people, it's pluralism. That is the sunny side of the proportional systems, and on the other side, the cloudy side, the rainy side, is fragmentation. Second element, it is unlikely that in a proportional system, only one party will receive the majority of votes, and therefore will have 50 plus 1 vote, and therefore can do without anybody else. And therefore, there's no party receives a majority of representatives, and therefore need for coalition governments. Coalition governments are something that we find them around Europe. If we look around Europe, as I've mentioned, in Italy, it's historically the coalition governments. In Germany, too, there's a coalition government. And there are other countries where there are big countries where there are coalition governments. Spain tried to put up a coalition government but didn't manage. So this brings instability, or can bring strong instability in the government, while the majoritarian system is meant to give stability. You don't like Donald Trump, but he's there and he governs, and he's there, and he can't be put out of office until someone else is elected. We'll see in 2020 this autumn if someone is elected instead of Donald Trump. So it gives stability to the system. Here, proportional systems are quite often, not always, quite often unstable systems, because the coalition, then the partners of the coalition start quarreling, and therefore this brings to government crisis. Now, then disadvantages again. We've seen that in the majoritarian system, the representative must be very much attached to his constituency. He must have all his relations. He must always go to his voters, explain what he's doing, what he's trying to do, try to receive indications. In the proportional system, as there are many representatives for each voting district, and the voting districts are generally pretty big, well, there's a much more feeble relationship between the representative and the constituency and the voters, and generally the relationship is between the representative and the party that has presented that candidate in that district. And this is something that we find quite often, that there's no relationship. You find a candidate of northern Italy who's sent to be elected in central Italy, or vice versa, or from southern Italy to central Italy. Just to point out that there's not so much a tie between the candidate and his voters, his or her voters, but between the candidate and his or her party, which is obviously means that there's less democratic accountability. These members of parliament are less accountable. They feel less responsible towards their voters. So this obviously is not something that we see very well from democratic theory. As proportional system, while the majoritarian system is more or less equal round, more or less in all the countries that adopt it, the majoritarian system, as it has these disadvantages, there are many attempts to try to dilute these disadvantages. And I'll indicate four the most common ways through which you try to reduce the disadvantages of the majoritarian system. First of all, the fact that there's a fragmentation, not an enormous amount of parties, maybe small parties with 2-3 representatives, which are necessary to create a majority. That creates difficulty to create a parliamentary majority. So what do? You do smaller voting districts. So instead of doing the whole of Lombardia, the whole of Lazio, you start restricting and making smaller districts by which the minorities, smaller political groups, will not receive enough votes to get elected. So this is one system by which you somehow try to reduce fragmentation. Or, and this is much more common, because clearly small voting districts means change in voting districts, and this is a complex operation in any country, what you do, you set a threshold to have representation in parliament. You start saying, hey, listen, if you don't reach this threshold, you won't get any representative. Typical example, last year you voted, I think most of you voted or had the chance, opportunity to vote for the European Parliament. In each country, the system, the voting system is different, but in Italy, there was a threshold of 5%. So if parties that did not go beyond the threshold of 5%, did not get any representation in the European Parliament. So generally depends, 3, 5, 8%. It depends very much on the country. And that is the way by which you somehow eliminate very small minorities. You start saying, well, 3, 5% is small. 8, 8 is not such a minority. It's a significant part of the voters. But anyhow, this is one of the systems by which you somehow reduce fragmentation, and therefore you want to reduce instability. Now, and then what are the other systems? Bonus to the party which receives the most votes. So you have a proportional electoral system, but you start saying the winner, there are many winners, but the one who receives, the party that receives the most votes will receive a bonus, a 20% bonus. Now this already, we experiment this. I'm talking to our Italian students. This happens typically in the voting in the regions, Italian regions, and major towns in Italy when you have to elect the mayor. The party or the candidate which receives the most votes has a bonus, which enables him to govern with a sufficient majority. So let's say you have 30% of the votes, which clearly is not a majority, is less than 1/3 of the votes, but you can you have a bonus which gives you a majority. So it's a system by which it's a proportional system, but at the end of the day, as the winner receives this prize, it becomes not entirely a majoritarian system, because also minorities are represented, but ensures that the party which is most elected, or the candidate that receives most votes, has an ample majority to govern and to conduct whatever business in, whether it is we're talking of government or parliament. So this is a further technique which is adopted in many countries, this bonus for the candidates or parties which have received the highest amount of votes on a national scale. Finally, and this is the French system, just keep it in mind because it's typically French, but at least it's important to notice that recurrently in Italy we say, hey, why don't we do like the French? So we might as well know what the French are doing. Now, the French had this issue of political pluralism, but the same need for stability. So what have they invented? A 2-round voting procedure. So in the first round, you see, let's say those 4 candidates come out. So we have these 4 candidates. So there's 1, A, B, C, D, 100 votes, 99 votes, 98 votes, 97 votes. And let's see if I can. Yes. So in this case, so what happens? This is the first round of elections. And so this means that we have seen the candidates, how they distribute their votes. Now we get to, as none of them has received the majority, because let's imagine we have 400, the voters are 400. Let's imagine candidate A receives 201 votes, and all the others, the other 199 are distributed among the other 3. So candidate A gets elected immediately in the first round because he has the majority of votes. But in this case, the example that I've made here, candidate A 100 votes, B 99, C 98, D 97, what happens? You don't know who's going to be elected, and you're going to do a second round of elections. You're going to do a second round of elections between the two most voted candidates, candidate A and candidate B. Now this brings in substantially, on one hand, somehow a majoritarian two-party system, because there are only two candidates, but this allows also agreements, because candidate A may say, hey, listen, if I must have the consensus, the consent of those who have voted for D or C, because otherwise I might lose. Now, this is something which is not hypothetical. Just think of, again, typical case is French elections. Here we find that there's an extreme right movement from National now called the Rassemblement National, Marine Le Pen, blonde woman, just to identify her, extreme right, who quite often in elections, both parliamentary elections and presidential elections, gets the most votes, but not the majority. Then there's a second turn, the second round of elections, and the opponent, let's imagine in this case, Mr. Emmanuel Macron, manages to bring to himself voters that would on the first round have not voted for him. Let's imagine socialist voters who say, hey, listen, I don't like Macron, but I don't want an extreme right candidate, the president, and so I will vote for Emmanuel Macron. So it is the second idea that there's a second, in democracy, you have your first choice, but you have your second best choice. So this is, sorry, just let me go back to the two-party system. Now, just for the moment, this is the part devoted to voting systems. I just would like to ask you if you have questions, have some questions on these topics. Please open your mic and you can and express yourself. And I think from this point of view, the video lesson makes it easier for people to intervene and to make, or if you do not want to speak because you are, you can type a message. I see your message. I can see your messages here. So are there any questions on this part devoted to voting systems, electoral systems? Silence. You're going to sleep. Is anybody still there? No question for me. Well, that's good. Thank you, Cordella. Cordella has sent me a message. She couldn't participate because he's just undergone major surgery and he's in Pesaro Urbino, and so which is not sort of it's a closed area and you can't leave Pesaro Urbino. It's not distressing being in Pesaro Urbino, but anybody? Nobody has questions. Nobody wants to ask. I have a question. Gerrymandering. Okay, then Lorenzo Giovanniello. Okay, so that's good. Now, first of all, listen, isn't that I want to abdicate from my role, but certain issues, if you go on Wikipedia, quite often you find a much more exhaustive and clear answer than what I can do, or maybe other teachers can do. So just look at gerrymandering and you go on Wikipedia and you'll have all you want on Wikipedia. Now, the system is this. Let's start from historical, from a little bit of history. And this history, and I see we have some English students, I think we have Kidd and we have Bacon. Are there other English students from other Salone? I haven't been able, if there's, are there other English students? No. Okay, but anyhow, what happens? In England, they've been voting for a long, long time. We'll be seeing this. But voters were very small number, because only if you were a male, you have an estate, you could vote. And voting wasn't even secret. You just went to, there was an assembly, and you just lifted your hand. Who's going to vote for Jones? And who's going to vote for White? And those who raised their hand. So that was how they voted. Now, this meant that you got elected and you became member of Parliament, of the House of Commons, with, 20 votes, 30 votes, not more than that. There's a whole lot of novels, of 19th century novels in the English novels who somehow describe the situation. These are called the so-called rotten boroughs. Just let me write it down. Let's see if I can use the text. Rotten boroughs. That means districts in which there were very few voters, and these voters sent always the same person for years and years, and there was no challenge, nobody could challenge it. In the meantime, in the UK, there'd been industrial revolution, and so all the people who were living in the towns, in industrial towns, did not have an opportunity to vote. Everything was decided by these rotten boroughs. Now, what happens when, at a certain point, at the end of the 19th century, there is empowerment of the working class through Labour Party, not only in the UK, but also in other parts of the world, they start challenging this situation by which the members of Parliament do not represent a large majority of the population. So, on the one hand, you are asking for wider voting rights. Not only those who have an estate can vote, but anybody who is of a certain age, and then at a certain point in the 20s, also women are allowed to vote. So the system of gerrymandering was that of the parliament that is sitting there, which draws the electoral districts, decides that the electoral districts are drawn on its image. So you want to keep out your opponents, and you draw it in a certain way. President Trump has been repeatedly accused of drawing certain electoral districts to keep a majority in Congress. As you know, he has lost majority in the House of Representatives. He still holds a good majority in Senate, but so they're they say Trump is drawing districts in order to have entirely Republican districts and to have a strong majority. As a matter of fact, this is an accusation which is moved also to Democrat presidents. The same thing accusation was moved to Obama, who clearly, being the first colored US president, wanted to ensure a full representation of the very vast, it's not a majority, but the very large millions and millions of colored voters in the US, which were underrepresented in Congress and in Senate. So Senate is not a problem of gerrymandering because it's the state, but we are talking mostly of House of Representatives. So you try to draw the boundaries of geographical boundaries of the district in such a way to favor certain groups that live in that district and that have certain political orientation. So you change them, and it is sufficient just to change them a little bit. And in a two-party system, it's sufficient that you shift 100, 500, 1,000 votes from one side to another to win that district. So this is what we call gerrymandering, tampering with electoral districts, with the geography of the electoral district, in order to try to obtain a majority in or as being elected or in parliament. Now that's the gerrymandering. Now I will send you obviously the slides. Giorgio Rosati has asked me the slides, and I will send them to you. Oh yes, yeah, we have Chris. Yes, thank you. I see. Sorry, I didn't see this. There's Hamilton. Hamilton is in a nice situation because he's Northern Irish, but he studies in Edinburgh. So, I mean, so this gives you an idea of minorities. Just think of Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland is divided. And it's not very clear when there's the Catholic group and the Protestant group, which have very strong feelings. There's been very bloody civil war in Northern Ireland, and so the issue of elections, of how the system works, and the fact how people vote in Northern Ireland, and so that is it. Now, French system, how are the seats distributed? Now, they're distributed in two ways. The first, the big amount of first of all, if France is divided in districts, if one candidate receives 50 plus 1% of votes, he or she gets elected the first round. So that is the first point. And so those get elected first. Then we have the second round. In the second round, we decide who is among the two or three, sometimes three candidates, which I have received the most votes, who is going to be elected. But those votes that are given to the other candidates are not lost. They are somehow recovered on a national basis. So also those who have lost the election, they have not won that district, they still have, on a smaller basis, they do have representation in the Assemblée Nationale, which is the parliament. The parliament. We shall see how the two-party system, the French system, between the Senate and the Assemblée Nationale, but we shall see it also the U.S. Senate versus the House of Representatives. So if the French system is those who get elected on the first round because they're the majority, that's fine, and that's the end of it. And then in the second round, the candidate which received the most votes gets elected, but also those who have received less votes than the first candidate, they will somehow take part in the distribution of with a smaller amount. There is a limited amount of seats which are reserved on a proportional basis to those who have not won the elections. So just to point out that the system is partially proportional because many parties, if you look at the French system, you find extreme left, you find environmentalist, you find socialist, then you find big, well, let's say Macron en marche, which is center left, and then you find a couple of movements of center right movements, and then you find Rassemblement National. So you find more or less at least 6 parties which are represented in the Assemblée Nationale. So just to point out that it is partially proportional, but tries to strengthen majoritarian a majority. So yes, quite right. Trovalucci says the French electoral system is a mix of majoritarian and proportional system. Exactly. That's exactly the what I wanted to say. How can some of the salvatici, how can some of the majoritarian disadvantages be solved or reduced? Now, this is a very good question, but it is a question that you must not put to me, but you must put to American and British citizens who are apparently quite happy with this system. Every now and then in England recently there's been voicing, especially because when there was this period in which Mrs. May called the snap elections because they call them the UK Prime Minister may call elections with a snap. It's not so easy, but anyhow, immediate elections, if he or she feels that it's a good moment. Mrs. May thought it was a good moment and said it was not a good moment. And so she called elections, and she already had a very small majority in the House of Representatives. She lost that too, and so she didn't manage to have, she had to lean on this very expensive support of the Democratic Ulster Party, that is the Protestant party of Northern Ireland. So citizens, and in that case, there was a whole lot of discussion in Great Britain saying, well, we should change the electoral system because it says that the electoral system does not guarantee stability. At the end of the day, then Mr. Boris Johnson called these elections. He needed also the agreement of the Labour Party. Labour Party said, yes, we will have elections in December. I don't know, maybe they had the wrong, they had polls, the opinion polls were they were not very reliable, but they thought they might win these elections. Instead, what happened is that Mr. Johnson Conservative Party received a very strong majority in the House of Commons, and therefore now can govern by himself and has delivered Brexit as he promised he would do. And so all the arguments against the majoritarian systems would be trying to introduce some kind of corrective. But majoritarian systems are, majoritarian. While proportional systems can be adapted, majoritarian systems are, it's that or nothing else. It's first past the post. If you start doing something similar, you've lost the whole idea of majoritarian system. So I apologize if I'm not able to provide a direct answer, but all the debate that you find in the US and the UK in order to have representation of minorities seems to lead nowhere, and nobody really wants to change the system. Voters and parliamentary institutions do not want to change this majoritarian system. They obviously are content with that system. Otherwise, in a democracy, people change. I mean, in Europe, when we want to change the system, well, we change it, although it is not so easy, but voters vote to change. Now, let's move on, and I'll only start with the next topic, which we want to analyze. Now, let me see, share screen. Sorry very much. Here we are. Yes, here we are. constitutionalism. So now constitutionalism is very important. It's very important for us lawyers because we shall see that this is, well, we are constantly engaged with constitutional issues, even if we're doing, very simple cases. Just think of putting a satellite antenna on the roof of a building, and the owner of the building or the condominium says, no, we don't allow you to put satellite. And the court comes in and says, hey, there you have a constitutional right to receive information, and therefore the condominium, the owner of the building, cannot prevent you, who are a tenant, to put the satellite dish on top of the roof. This seems, we find constitutional issues everywhere. I've just made the most apparently silly issue, which concerns only two private parties, the tenant in a building and the owner of the building, and apparently it's on a property issue. It has nothing to do with of great importance. As it has to do with right to receive information, it becomes a constitutional issue. So let's look at why constitutionalism is so important. First of all, because, as I've mentioned since my first lesson, second lesson, we have to start from the US. Again, it is the US that tells us that modern democracies need a constitution. Why is this constitution? We have it at the summit of our legal system. There is the constitution. That is, what is a constitution? We see it expressed by the US Constitution and subsequent constitutions which we find throughout the world. A written text, first of all, this is very important, also for the things I will say later on. Solemnity or approval. The Constitution is not any law. When there's a constitution, there's always some kind of very important ceremony, or it is voted by the people and it is approved by the people. So it is not like any law. So there's solemnity, and often we find also a preamble of the Constitution. I mean, just think of the US Constitution, we the people, and then those 5, 6, 7 lines, which are the beginning of the US Constitution, are very important. Then we find other countries, just think we find the Irish Constitution rather than the Hungarian or Polish Constitution, which express, what is the sense of their being together, being Irishman, Polishman, Hungarian, and so it expresses very much of the sense of that country. It's rhetoric, there's no doubt about that, but it has a legal influence. So we can't just think that, Constitution is not any piece of law. It has also a rhetoric, and it has a power of authority, which goes beyond the fact that it is put at the summit of the hierarchy of the legal system. That means that it is obviously the highest norm, and therefore all other norms, whether they are of ordinary law voted by Parliament, or any other bylaw voted by other institutions at the local level, they must conform to that constitution. Just think of Roma Tre University somehow decides something which is against the Constitution, which discriminates on the basis of sex or on the basis of religion and so on. This obviously would be immediately challenged, and although it is a provision which is at a very low administrative level, it cannot hold against the Constitution. Then, what is interested in why today we are very interested in modern constitutionalism is that we see it very clearly. The US Constitution of 1787 reflected the US of 1787. Late 18th century ideas in a colony which was lacking all infrastructures and so on. What happens now if we look at constitutions? present-day constitutions, we see that they try to represent what are the needs of society in a certain moment. And therefore, they indicate interests and values, which have a constitutional value. When a certain principle, a certain value, a certain interest is within the Constitution, we believe, because we believe in hierarchy of sources of the law, we believe that principle is above others, and that legislation beneath the Constitution must abide by, must conform to that, to those principles. So we see that increasingly we want to, in political debate, in parliamentary debate, there's constantly the idea that the Constitution should be changed according to certain changes. Just let's take the Italian Constitution, the idea, for example, that sort of digital citizenship should be part of our Constitution. So we are citizens not only when we are sort of in flesh and bones, but we are citizens also on digital citizens, or the principle that no discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, or the fact that, you know, anybody can form a family, not only a man and a woman, but also people of same sex, and have this constitutionalized. And then just think of the very important movement, rights of animal rights. The fact that, you know, we believe, many people believe that the animals are part of our world and we should respect them. The fact that we use them normally for food, well, this does not mean that they do not have rights. So just to point out that there's a push, not only in Italy, but in other countries, to have certain new values, new interests be constitutionalized within the highest text of the law of the land. So just to point out how important constitutions are from the not only from a strictly legal point of view, but also to represent and to have a country believe that their constitution belongs to them. Now, what is the exception? We have this very nice exception. So the Constitution since 1787 is the US Constitution, and then the evolution. I mean, keep in mind that before we reach a modern constitution in continental Europe, we have to wait the end of the Second World War. We find modern constitutions in Austria and Germany, that is the two powers that lost the First World and they were empires and were turned into republics, and they became republics, and they had a new constitution. They created a constitution, and we have a very big effort. One of the main, this is a name that you should remember because it is, now let's see if I can, no. Please keep in mind this, Hans Kelsen. Have you met Hans Kelsen in philosophy of law? No, not yet.
Yes.
So Hans Kelsen is one of the most important philosophers of the law. He was Austrian. He got chucked out of university because he was Jewish when the Nazis took hold of Germany and Austria. He is the father of 20th century constitutionalism in Europe, and he was the man behind, the lawyer, the scholar behind the Austrian Constitution. There's a whole lot of ideas which we're still using. I mean, it's incredible how much these ideas are still going about, and I mean, very rigorous, maybe for us Mediterraneans who like a rather more, let's say, more flexible system. Maybe he's too rigid, but he's a great name of legal scholarship of the 20th century. So, but we find constitutions in the European continent only starting from the First World War. After the First World War. The problem is that those are only 20 years, so it's a very short time. And so really constitutions in continental Europe, we find them after the Second World War. First, the best examples are the Italian Constitution of 1947-48, the German Constitution of 1949, which have many aspects in common from certain points of view. But just to point out that this is shows that the history of constitutionalism in continental Europe is quite recent. Now, we take it for granted that there is a constitution, is a written text, solemnly voted, and it has a whole lot of 100, 200 articles inside. Then we go to the United Kingdom, which is not historically a democracy. The first democracy is the US. It becomes democratic only when voting rights are granted not only to all male but also to women. And then we can start saying, well, that is more democratic. So we're looking at the early decades of the 20th century. So before we can say that there's a democracy in what we mean today by democracy in the UK, it takes some time because it was very aristocratic system. We look at the UK as a democratic model of democracy where citizens vote. They voted for Brexit. We don't understand why they voted, but they voted for Brexit and they received Brexit from Mr. Boris Johnson. Whether we like it or not, we're not going to start deciding what the British, at least from Rome, we leave it to Hamilton and to Bacon, who are English students, and so. But let's look at the exception. The UK does not have doesn't have a constitution as we imagine a constitution should be. So there's an Article 1 which says what the United Kingdom is, and then all the rest. We have, but so some people say, oh, but the UK does not have a constitution. Nothing is more wrong than that. The UK has, and always has had a constitution, only the idea of constitution, the UK, the English idea of constitution is different from ours. The way they structure the constitution. So just keep in mind this, there is a constitution, but or rather, let's see it from the British point of view. There can be many ways of having a constitution. The one typical way is the US model with all the consequences, but there's also a different model. And as lawyers, we are inventive. There's no reason why we should say, oh, but the UK does not have a constitution. It does have a constitution, and it does have very important effects on the system, on the UK system. So what is this strange, quote unquote, constitution of the UK? Strange for us continental Europeans, not surely strange for British students who study when they study, just like we in Italy study constitutional law, they study constitutional law, but they study it obviously looking at a different system, constitutional system. So it is not contained in one single coherent and comprehensive written document, but in a multitude of texts. I'll just list a few of them, not several others that could be listed. First of all, Magna Carta, which we will analyze in the, I think in the next lesson, we shall analyze this in detail. 1215. So, I mean, for us, something of 1215 is history. It's pre-history. I mean, we can study this in when we're studying history of law, it doesn't seem something present day. No, the Magna Carta is part of the UK Constitution, today's UK Constitution. Not in all its provisions. I will be sending you the text as soon as we finish the lesson, but it is a very complex text, typical of those medieval times, but a whole lot of provisions still are well alive and will be used in political and legal debate and judicial debate in the UK. So it's not something, a dead document. So we have Magna Carta, the Bill of Rights, 1689, which seems very modern for the UK. Well, this is something more, something else. Again, a very important document which indicates the change of regime. I've already mentioned in the 17th century, England is torn by a civil war. There's or even a short period, a very short period of a republic by Oliver Cromwell. And when finally the king is beheaded, and so very bloody period, at least 50 years, if not more, of very total instability in England. And when finally things get settled and monarchy is reinstated and the parliament calls for foreign dynasty to come and become king of Britain, they call this prince, this Dutch prince, William of Orange, and he must swear on this Bill of Rights, which is somehow the condensed version of all the rights of the land. And so that is substantially on what are the constitutional principles of Britain at that moment, end of the 17th century. So that is also a very important document, and we shall analyze it when we look at the Bill of Rights on the part devoted to the Bill of Rights. Then we find this Act of Settlement, which establishes what is the role of when there's a problem because the Orange family, there's William and then Mary and Anne, but there's a problem of how the dynasty is going to continue. There's no subsequent, there's no issue of that dynasty, so they have to call for someone more, someone new. We've seen they've called Prince of Hanover, George I, and so on, which bring to the Windsors, today's Windsors. And so this Act of Settlement also is a very important text, which somehow sets what are the role of monarchy in Britain. And then, this is very important, the role of what are called constitutional conventions. Now, these constitutional conventions are not written anywhere. The fact, for example, that the British Prime Minister is chosen by the Queen on one person, which is the leader of the party that wins the elections. So there's there's written nowhere that it is that it should be Mr. Boris Johnson, or if the Labour had won, Mr. Jeremy Corbyn. No, it's a constitutional convention. Everybody agrees on that. And if, let's say, that Queen Elizabeth did not like Boris Johnson for some reason, many reasons for which one might not like Mr. Boris Johnson, she couldn't choose someone else from the Conservative Party and say, hey, but I don't like Boris Johnson, I'll choose someone else. No, Constitutional Convention says that the Queen will choose her because it's her Prime Minister, in the person of the leader of the party that has a majority in Parliament. And as a matter of fact, if the leader changes, even without elections, the Queen must appoint that leader. This is exactly what happened with Mrs. Theresa May, who was there and who had been designated David Cameron, who lost the referendum, stepped down, and said, I'm no longer the leader of the Conservative Party. And at the end of the day, they chose Mrs. May. So she was designated leader of the Conservative Party, and she became the Prime Minister. And the same with Mr. Boris Johnson. When Theresa May stepped down and Johnson was designated leader of the Conservative Party before the general elections of December, he too was, the Queen called him, not someone else. So this is a typical constitutional convention by which nothing is written, but everybody agrees that you have to behave in a certain way. So it's something not written. So a constitution, as you see, the English system tells us the constitution is not only one whole comprehensive text, but can be also something made of various texts and of unwritten conventions between political parties. Now, just to point out, I just would like to add one final point. It seems maybe we think again, you know, these British, they're very strange. What are they doing? Always they're trying to sort of make things complicated. If you go in Scandinavian countries, which are surely countries which are peaceful and sort of we generally often look at them as models of democracies, we see that often these countries do not have a constitution just like we imagine to have a constitution. They don't have that. They have a constitution. Their constitutional principles are set in various documents. So just to point out that we obviously look at the UK because it's a big country with whom, I mean, the whole world has relations, and we study a lot of English law, but it's not only the UK. We look countries which seem to us, at least many of us, when we think of Denmark, Norway, or Sweden, we look at them and say, where's their constitution? You find out that their constitution is not a document like we have, but a set of various texts of historical and legal importance, and obviously of conventions. So I would, if with your consent, I would stop here, because then tomorrow we can move on to very important aspect of Bill of Rights. Now, 63. That's great. That's great. I see here. I see 63 participants. If you now first, please let me remind you. Please, if you haven't just sent a message, just tell me you are connected, because otherwise I don't find the 63. I don't know who's here. Just to know who, so I can write to those who are not here. Secondly, please send me, just sufficient you send it to me. You can, if you look at the chat, you see you can choose whether you send it to me, the host, that I'm hosting this conference, this lesson, not to everyone. You send me comments on whatever comments, but especially I would appreciate comments on this lesson, this form of lesson. We'll have to make do with it. I don't know how long this crisis is going to last, but we better make the best we can do of these technologies. Third point, if there are any questions on the second part of the lesson that you feel you want to make, please just please type a message here and tell me. So Isabella, but who is Isabella? Let me find her. I think there's only one Isabella, so I think I will find Isabella. Let's see. Isabella Melissa San Marco. Yes, okay. There's only one Isabella. Sorry, no, because when you put on your name, then I have to look at the list. Well, so that's fine. Are there questions on this issue of constitutionalism, on different forms of constitutionalism? At any rate, just to tell you, what I will be sending you, because what I do on Zoom, I I book this lesson, so I'll set another meeting for tomorrow from 4 to 6, and I will be sending you because each meeting has an ID. It's not the same ID as today's. It'll be a different ID. It's nine number indication, so you will have to type in that indication to join the lesson. So don't use today's ID because obviously this lesson is finished. So obviously you would not, with that number, we won't be able to access tomorrow's lesson. So I will, today I will book tomorrow's lesson, and I will send to all of you the 9-letter indication, the 9-number indication of the code of the lesson, of the meeting ID. Okay, then I see everything is apparently clear. I'll just let me do a little bit more slides. I must prepare the slides also for tomorrow. I think I will be sending you at the end of the week. Just let me prepare the slides for tomorrow and for Wednesday, and I'll be sending them to you on Thursday, Friday. Please remember, I appreciate criticisms because it's a new way of making of teaching, and so I too need to learn. So thank you, and enjoy the rest of the day, and I hope. Aren't there other teachers going to do the same? Yes. Just to tell you. I think for Professor Resta I'm talking of the studying law at the Roma 3 classes. We have to distinguish between the English classes of studying law at Roma 3, and I see they have already organized themselves. Professor Pozzolo too has organized himself. And for the ordinary Italian classes, the problem is this: with other colleagues, we started off by ourselves because we felt we should start immediately. Now, the whole university is putting in place a system which is called Teams, which is sort of a platform just like the one like Zoom, which is based on Microsoft, because Microsoft is the manager of most software facilities of the university, and therefore you will be receiving very soon an indication of the various lessons you will be able to follow. I'm speaking to my Italian students of their ordinary classes of this semester. They should be receiving an indication what is the Teams platform and how to access these lessons. I know, because I've discussed this over the weekend with other colleagues who teach in the English classes, studying law at Roma 3, and surely I see that all of them, whether it is Giulio Napolitano for comparative administrative law, Pozzolo for his seminar, Giorgio Resta for his high-tech law, all of them and us are somehow mentioned. So you should be receiving from your teachers indications on how to access their lessons. I confine myself to what I can do, which is not much, but I try to do in this class the best I can do. I obviously have no authority or to somehow push my colleagues to do similar initiatives. But we are all working at Roma 3. I was there this morning. I spent a whole morning with Professor Paolo Azzeni, who is the Vice Rector for Educational Aspects, with the Director General, Dr. Pasicata, with the Rector, Professor Pietro Marchi, and that we are all working to somehow face this crisis, as in all universities we are doing this. So just to point out, it is something you're quite right to expect. Please request for more services. University is there to provide teaching services. So I think that, I mean, apart from what you asked me, also through your representatives, your student representatives, it is important that you somehow give the indication of what you feel as the students of the law, of the law department, what you want. Make yourself heard, because I repeat, and I repeat it always, the university, it's not a hierarchical relationship between I'm a teacher and you are students, but it's a community, and we share common values and common objectives. So if we teachers need your help. And if we don't have your help, your support, and your push, obviously we tend to sit down and say, okay, everything's fine, I'm not going to do anything. So having said that, good, and I see already some messages. Share the PowerPoint files. Yes, I already said. I will share them at the end of the week. I'll be on Thursday. I will be sending you the PowerPoints of the free lessons of today, tomorrow, and Wednesday's lesson. So be assured that you will have the PowerPoint. I'm not keeping them for myself. It's useful for you in this context. It's useful for you. Okay, I see that's fine. And then I will look if there are other messages. I will try to I'll try to do my best to answer if now that I closed the lesson. If you have other requests, just send me an email. Okay, goodbye to everybody.